Right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Fedora track, I guess, at DevConf. So to start the day properly, we'll be talking about Debian. So just to introduce myself, my name is Stephen Kitt. I'm a Debian developer, but I also work for Red Hat. It's not incompatible. My day-to-day job doesn't involve packaging, but my day-to-day job does involve running Fedora on my laptop, and one of the things I like, and it's part of the freedoms we have in free software, is to be able to modify stuff. And so I started looking at Fedora packaging. So this talk is going to be about my thoughts as I discovered the Fedora packaging stuff. I'm going to be talking about Debian as well, because I imagine lots of you aren't familiar with what goes on in Debian. So if we want to compare, it helps to know what I think is important in Debian, what I like about packaging there, and then look at how things are done in Fedora, at least how I understand things are done in Fedora. I don't have answers. If you think I'm saying I have answers, I'm probably wrong. See the quote up there. And lots of this stuff is quite complicated, but the underlying thought behind my talk is really that distros are getting more and more complicated. We've got more and more work to do inside distributions, but distributions aren't exciting as they once were. So it's harder to get people to join the effort. And so I think what we need to think about focusing our efforts more, doing things in the right place so that we avoid duplicating. I can think of this perhaps as an extension of the keynote, extending collaboration beyond the Red Hat distributions to other distributions. And Debian is just the example because that's what I know, but I think it applies more generally. Some caveats, so you can assume I'm wrong about Fedora. This perhaps is my way of getting into the community by saying stuff that's wrong and being corrected. If I say something, if I point something out in Debian, don't assume that I'm saying that I think it's missing in Fedora. It's just that I think it's interesting in Debian. And of course, Stockholm Syndrome, I've been using Debian for over 20 years, packaging for quite a long time. So if I think something is nice, maybe it's just because I'm used to it. How I came to packaging, it helps set the scene a bit. So I went to university in the mid-90s in the UK, and back then that meant Solaris on SPARC stations to a large extent, but this was just at the time when Linux was becoming usable vaguely on the desktop, so I was running Slackware 3, and it was great to be able to run, or at least try to run, some of the software we used for our studies on my own computer, because it meant not having to go to the labs all the time, being able to work from my student room, and so on. And so that's how I got into sort of porting software, at least. This was also a time when software development in the Unix world re-exploded in some way, and so lots of students, me included, were interested in running new software like Mutt, or SLRN, or JED, or LIX. And this was also a time when storage was expensive still. So we had small quotas, and if you wanted to run Mutt on a university computer to read your university email, the admins weren't going to compile it for you, so you had to compile it in your own home directory, but that meant that you were eating into your quotas. And so with some friends at university, we set up, with the agreement of the university as well, we set up the system where we had a shared home directory for hosting software. And so I started packaging software there using GNU Sto. And then I joined the administration team for the the student-hosted computing services, which are still called TARDIS at Edinburgh University. And so I did more Sto-based packaging there. And then in the late 90s, I won a competition and won a bunch of CDs with Debian on them, and I started using Debian and never looked back. Then I became a Debian contributor. So in Debian's definition, a contributor is anybody who interacts with the project in some way. So I started filing bugs, and that made me officially a Debian contributor. Then I started maintaining a package, the usual story, some software got orphaned that I cared about. In this case, it was the joystick calibration tools because I like playing games on my computers. And so I became the packager for the joystick packages, and I actually became the new upstream for that as well because it had been abandoned upstream. So I now maintain Linux console tools, so that's input attach, JSCal, JSTest, and so on. And then eventually I graduated onto the next level, which is Debian maintainer. That's when somebody in Debian entrusts you with packaging your software without supervision. If you're just a Debian packager, every time you upload a package, you need to get sponsored. There's the same kind of mechanics in Fedora, as I understand it. You need somebody to check your package and upload it for you. Once you're a maintainer, there's no oversight on your small selection of packages. This also gives you access to some of the benefits of being in Debian, like, for instance, access to an LWN subscription, email from Facebook and Google recruiters, and access to all of Valve's catalog on Steam, which I find quite ironic given the freedom values in Debian, but never mind. As a gamer, it was quite interesting. And then I became a Debian developer, and so I think that's a bit like a trusted packager in Fedora. Once you're a developer, you can upload anything you want to the archive for any package. So if you try and do it for something that's not yours, there are social barriers to that, but technically you can. And you also get to vote in all the major decisions in Debian. What's it like when you're actually developing in Debian? And so to cover that, I thought I would go over the dashboard that we have for packages in Debian. Because if something appears in the dashboard, it means that somebody took the time to write the code to put it in the dashboard, which means that somebody cares about it. And cares about it enough to do all the social engineering and so on that goes into getting stuff changed in Debian. So you can see here, this is the top of the screen with, well, my name, and then a list of packages, source packages on the left. So I have 57 source packages in Debian main. I'll explain what that means just a bit later. But going through all the columns shows what's important in Debian. So obviously bugs, I think that's the same everywhere. And we have two big categories of bugs, RC bugs and the rest. RC bugs are ones where if your package is important enough, you'll delay the release, otherwise your package will just be chucked out of the distribution. So you really need to care about those, keep that at 0, otherwise your package is liable to go away. And the rest is, well, stuff you haven't got around to fixing yet. Then we have version information. So this is the versions of the packages that we have in Debian and in a favored downstream Ubuntu for whatever reason. And so we have the stable version, which is the one that we still support and provide security fixes for and important bug fixes for. And then testing, which is the next release that's coming along. So we are in the process of freezing it, so it'll be coming out soon. Unstable, which is the sort of staging ground for everything. And then experimental, which is where you upload things that aren't supposed to be part of a release yet. And so version numbers progress from the right to the left, and then to the left, from the left to the right, into Ubuntu again. We have also another type of versions, which are the ones underlined there on the left. Backports. So for some software where the release cycle of Debian is just too slow, we provide backports that are, it's a bit like Apple in a way. So users of Debian Stable, the last release, can install a newer version of the package quite easily that's been built for Stable. So they don't have any dependency issues, but they get access to new features. And that package there in particular is the GOG.com downloader, which needs to be updated every once in a while. And the excuse thing, that's a link to a page that tells you why your package hasn't migrated from unstable to testing yet. Then we have a VCS column. This is a link to where the packaging is stored. And this being Debian, there are a number of different ways of maintaining your package. I tend to use Git with one specific workflow. This being Debian again, there are different workflows even if you use Git. And the tick mark means that your VCS is up to date with what's in the archive, because sometimes people forget to push their repos when they upload something to the archive. Then we have the build daemons, and this links to a page like that, which shows the state of your package on all the architectures in Debian. And this is a big difference with Fedora. In Debian, we have tons of architectures. The white ones at the top are release architectures. So if your package doesn't build on one of these, then you might get kicked out of the distribution. So there's a bunch of stuff that we care about there that can cause pain sometimes, like RML at the top for old ARM systems. These are so old that they don't support certain C++11 atomic operations, and so there is software now which will never build anymore for these machines. We have new architectures like ARM64, MIPS64EL, PPC64EL, and then older ones that are slowly dying, well, like RML, perhaps MIPS, I guess. And then the gray ones, they are either upcoming architectures that aren't ready yet, like SPARC64, PPC64, or old architectures that used to be release architectures and have been demoted, like Alpha, or architectures that have never really made it, like SH4. And so it's nice to know what's happening on these, but it's not bad if your software doesn't build on them. But if you care about an upcoming architecture, you can keep an eye on it there. And the porters are always glad for help. Going back to the dashboard, the next set of columns are quality metrics. So we have a bunch of different tools that run automatically on the whole archive every so often and check things for us. So debcheck is a set of basic tests for package dependencies. Lintian is a bit like RPM lint. It does lots and lots of different checks of varying types. It could be spelling fixes, well, spelling mistakes, or licensing issues, or whether your software uses bind now or pi, things like that. And in Debian, it's become the way of driving change. So we have this weird thing in Debian where Debian policy, which is the sort of equivalent of the Fedora guidelines, isn't normative, it's descriptive. So things end up in policy once they're the consensus. So if you change behavior, if you want to get a change into Debian, you convince enough people that it's a good thing, and then once it becomes the norm, it's codified in policy. You don't change policy first to drive change. We used to drive change through the release team and release goals. That's not happened over the last few releases. Well, people are thinking about it again, and there was discussion at the last DebConf, not DevConf, the Debian conference. But in practice, what happens now is if you want to drive change or introduce a new check, you add it to Lintian, and then people see these warnings on their packages, and so if they care about their package, then they tend to fix them. This doesn't address packages that have dormant maintainers or maintainers who don't care so much, but that's how change has, well, it's the emerging way of doing changes in Debian now. Then pew parts, that's a tool which installs and uninstalls your package and makes sure that that happens cleanly so you don't leave anything behind. Then we have CI. I think this is probably fairly similar to the CentOS CI that was discussed in the keynote. The idea here is that you can add tests in your package, what we call auto-package tests, that are run externally to your package. So these aren't tests that run during the build. These are tests that run after the build. We take the artifacts that the build produces, install them, and then run your tests, along with any other package you want. This is really useful because for a library, you can write an auto-package test that checks that once your package is installed, you can link code that uses your library. And this is a better test than a build test because during the build knows where stuff is, but you might still have messed up your package, and users can't use your package. And so I maintain tool chains in Debian, and this is one of the things I've been meaning to do for the last several years is add CI tests for my stuff, but I haven't got around to it. Rep, that's the reproducible build stuff that Holger talked about yesterday. So a tick mark here means that your package is reproducible. If it's in brackets, it means that the current version of your package hasn't been tested yet, but that the previous one was. And I think this is really important in Debian, and go and watch Holger's talk if you didn't see it yesterday. Then we have another column which is PopCon, the popularity contest. So this is a fairly meaningless number, really, which measures how many people have installed your package and are willing to tell the world about it. Even installed doesn't mean all that much because lots of people have got tons of packages installed that they don't use. And we sort of try and measure that, but it's imperfect. Things like rel time and so on mean that we can't measure things very well. And so it ends up a bit like the pile of books that you've got at home that you mean to read one of these days. But it's still useful to get some measure, see trends, if your package is going up or down, and then when we decide whether to remove something, obviously if something's got a high popcon, we'll think about fixing it rather than removing it. But if it's got a low popcon, lots of RC bugs, then it's out. Just to give you some measure, the highest popcons are around 200,000. And then finally, the last column on the dashboard is the watch column, and so this is what upstream is on. So we have a flag in the package, a piece of information in the package that tells the tools that look at this how to check what the current upstream version is, and you can see here whether you need to update your package or not, because same as in Fedora, we try to keep up with upstream as far as possible during Debian development. So that's all the columns I've covered, and now if you scroll down these dashboards, there are a number of different sections that reflect different things in Debian as well. So the first one is the main section. This is the real Debian distribution. What is DFSG free, so free according to the Debian Free Software Guidelines. It matches our licensing. All the dependencies are free software as well. All the build dependencies are free software too. Then we have Contrib, which is not officially part of Debian GNU Linux, but is hosted on the repository. So this is software that's free software, but that has either a non-free runtime dependency or a non-free build time dependency. So for instance, here this is Basilisk 2, which is a Macintosh emulator. And to run it, you need a Macintosh ROM, which is obviously non-free, so it can't be in the main section. Then we have, so that covers the different types of software. There's also non-free, which is completely non-free stuff like the NVIDIA drivers and so on, or firmware that you unfortunately need to run lots of computers nowadays. Then we have different sections that cover different ways software gets into Debian. So non-maintainer uploads, this is software that I've uploaded even though I'm not the maintainer of the package. So usually that's to fix an RC bug when the maintainer isn't responding for software that I care about. Then we have sponsored and other uploads. So that's software where someone else has packaged the software and has asked either me specifically or the community in general to review their package and sponsor it for them. And this is a great way of getting new contributors into the community slowly without the sort of administrivia that's involved in joining Debian properly. They can start packaging and get sponsored. And you tend to sponsor the same packages several times, and that creates relationships between maintainers. And eventually you hope that the maintainers will graduate to become Debian maintainers or Debian developers. Then we have another section which doesn't correspond to anything in the archive. This is intent. This is more about the future of packaging, so own WNPP bugs. And just now I can't remember what WNPP stands for, but basically it's the list of bugs that say, I intend to package this, or I want this to be packaged for me. I have an ITP for Piper because I maintain libratbag and ratbagd, so it makes sense to have Piper in there as well. But Piper isn't really ready yet, so it's still sitting there. And then finally, the last one is packages for which I, as a Debian developer, have given others Debian maintainer rights over. And that pretty much covers the dashboard. So let's talk about Fedora now. Like I said, I work for Red Hat, so when I joined Red Hat, I got a laptop provided for me with CSB, but my colleagues told me I'd be better off running Fedora for the kind of work I'm doing. They were right. Fedora turns out is a fantastic developer distribution, and I find it absolutely great. You go and look for Fedora on the internet, and you end up at getfedora.org, and it's a very, very focused website with a punchy message: choose freedom, choose Fedora. That makes me think of Trainspotting, right? And lots of people choose not to choose freedom, they choose something else, but who needs reasons when you've got Windows or something like that? Look up the quotes on Wikipedia. And there's just 3 big squares there, and you go over them, and they change to download links, and so you're just a couple of clicks away from an ISO. You stick that on a USB key, and a few minutes later, you're running Fedora, which is fantastic. Discovering Fedora as a user, so like I said, focus, and you can see that in the distribution as well. It doesn't claim to do as many things as Debian does, although Fedora now has a huge number of source packages as well. But and it works really well, so that's testament really to lots of people, but distributions, Fedora specifically, other distributions, upstreams, it's not hard to make a Linux system that sort of works. It's still an awful lot of effort to get a distribution that works really well, and Fedora does work really well. Fast updates. And of course, so at home I tend to use Debian testing, so I'm on a rolling distribution. It's a bit more like Arch Linux than Fedora, but still getting a stable distribution out every 6 months and keeping it running all the time with stable kernel updates and so on is no mean feat. And it's a great development environment. I find it quite interesting that Fedora has Eclipse packaged, Debian has NetBeans packaged, and has been trying to have Eclipse packaged for years, but it's a really painful thing, packaging Java in general, but Eclipse in particular. DNF, so that takes some getting used to compared to apt. There's some good things about it, like rollbacks. That's I find that quite fantastic when you need to use it. The way it doesn't recover well when it crashes, that's not so good. But it's been discussed on the mailing lists, so it'll improve, I guess. And then RPM fusion, so that's Fedora's part of hypocrisy, I guess. You know, a bit like Debian's part of hypocrisy with contrib and non-free that aren't part of the distribution, but that lots of people end up needing anyway. Fedora has RPM fusion for that. And that's out of scope, really. And then, like I said, I like being able to use my freedoms, and that means packaging stuff. There's stuff I package in Debian that's not in Fedora that I use. And so I started looking at packaging. And this is another area where you can see Fedora's focus and the effort that's been spent on websites and so on. You go to the Fedora website, and there's a website dedicated to what can you do for Fedora. And it's not about just packaging. There's a whole bunch of different things. And so when I was preparing this talk, I went back to the site to take some screen grabs. And the one that came up for me that time was design. So I would like to be able to design, but I can't. So nope, nope, nope. And the second one that came up was packaging. Yes, that's exactly what I was looking for. So you click on that, and you want to become a package maintainer. Yes. And that takes you to a wiki page. So the design changes a bit, but it's still... Right, okay, so somebody in the audience points out that there's a new version of Wikimedia that's being set up, so this should improve. But even despite the deficiencies of the Wikimedium here, I still find it interesting that the first thing you land on is a flowchart that shows you the whole process from start to finish. So you know what you're getting into. And then it goes into detail, and the detail is this. And I thought it was interesting to go over that because it shows what's important to the community. You know, how you get people involved in your community shows what's important for your community. And the first thing when you want to get involved as a packager is read the guidelines. And you get links to 2 pages, one that sort of shows you the basic workflow for building a package, and then another one that goes into a lot of detail. And you really need to read both. And I think it's very good that if you want to, it says that you want to drive the level of quality, at least for packagers, if you recommend that they start by reading all the guidelines first. And another thing I liked about the guidelines is that they focus on one way of doing things. So when I started looking at Fedora packaging, this was RPM build. Now it's Fed package. So that means that things change in Fedora as well. But you don't end up with the same kind of situation as you do in Debian, where newcomers come along and they say, how do I package this stuff? And they get a dozen different answers. In Fedora, there's one answer, fed package. Then you start doing the administrivia stuff, create accounts, join mailing lists, and this is an important part of being a member of a community on the mailing list. And so if you join them, at this point you've got nothing to say, so you'll start receiving email and you start reading stuff and getting a feel for the community. Ensure suitability, so this is about licensing and stuff like that. Before you start work on your package, make sure that it's not going to be for nothing. This is quite complicated. I saw some reviews just recently where somebody had gone through the effort of doing all the packaging, and in the review it was pointed out to them that no, there was a file somewhere that had a bad license, and so the package couldn't go into Fedora. Understand responsibilities. This is important as well. If you become a package maintainer, it's not just about getting your software, the software that you're interested in, uploaded into the archive and into Fedora. It's about providing at least some level of support for it afterwards. You might receive bug reports, stuff like that. You need to react to them. Then lurk. So it's not stated explicitly like that on the wiki page, but that's the intent really. Stick around, have a look at other reviews, see what other people are saying before you pipe up and introduce yourself and stuff. Then set tools up. So that's easy enough. Well, for somebody with a technical background, I guess, at least. And only then make your package, upload it, request a review, and at this point, you've put in all the effort, and so there's a fair amount of chance that your package will end up in Fedora, I imagine. And so at this point, it makes sense to tell upstream. And this is something very important, I think, as well. And it's a focus I've perceived from reading the Fedora documentation is stick close to upstream. And I like that message because it means less duplication of effort. If you can get stuff done upstream, then all distros benefit from it. And it means you won't have to do it again and again and again every time upstream release a new version. And it's also useful for upstream to know that their package is going to be in a new distribution, so they're going to end up with a whole pile of new users potentially, and they might be getting new bug reports, possibly for an old version that's whatever version's ended up in whatever release people are using. And so it changes expectations for some upstreams, and I guess perhaps in some cases at this point you'll get a reaction from upstream saying, no, please don't. Then next step, introduce yourself. So at this point you pipe up on the mailing lists and say, hi, this is who I am. Again, part of community, and I guess this is part of the friends thing in Fedora. And then the last two steps are, actually get your package in the distribution, so get sponsored, and finally, you've done all this, so you add your package to the SCM. And then it goes in. From all this, you might have gathered, I think community feel is very important, and so during this process you get a chance to measure it. And so I was hoping to be further along in the process than I actually am by the time I gave this talk, so I do have some packages that I'm working on, but I'm trying to stick close to upstream thing, and there are changes that need to be made upstream before the packages are suitable for Fedora, so I actually haven't gotten around to the request a review part or introduce myself on the mailing lists part. But I am working on it, and I have been lurking a lot. So the mailing lists, you get told to join Fedora Devel, the announce list, and if you're keen, the packages list. So not many mailing lists, but they're fairly high volume. And if you compare that with Debian, Debian has Debian Devel, which has a certain reputation, which it doesn't really live up or down to, depending on the way you look at it. But people say that Debian Devel is a very high volume mailing list. It isn't anymore. It's much less than Fedora Devel. It's really, I think the systemd stuff killed it, to be honest. Which is a shame. But we have lots of other mailing lists with more specific focuses. For instance, there's a Debian mentors list, which is dedicated to helping people with packaging. And what I find very interesting in the Debian community is that you don't just get newbies asking for help on that list, you also get experienced Debian developers who are discovering new packaging techniques or packaging new things that are in new areas. You know, for instance, they might have been packaging lots of C stuff and they need to package a Python module at some point and they don't know much about it, so they'll go and ask there. And it's a place where you can be vulnerable without it mattering. You can say, yeah, I've got 20 years experience in Debian, but I don't know this stuff. And nobody will look down on you for it. And the feeling I got from the Fedora mailing lists is that they're all very polite, even in the flame wars, which happen every now and again. And you do see the difference with with lots of people on the mailing list who do this professionally. Like Matthew Miller said in the keynote, there's only a third of Fedora contributors who are employed by Red Hat, but I do think that makes a difference. And you don't get all the sort of snipers that you get on Debian mailing lists, people who are not actually contributing to the community, but who will take any chance they can get to flame on the mailing lists. And that makes for a more welcoming atmosphere. IRC, so I haven't spent all that much time on Hash Fedora, but I thought it was very, very, very interesting that if you try and join, or if your IRC client rejoins, and you haven't actually had time to register, do the register stuff, or give the password for your NIC, you end up in Fedora unregistered. And I guess it shows the importance that is placed on having stable NICs, owning your NIC, owning your reputation, or whatever. And then the review queue as well. So I've been looking at lots of other reviews, and again that shows the kind of community feel. And the reviews tend to be mostly constructive. Is really the impression I get. There's not much. If you make a mistake, it's just a mistake. It doesn't mean you're a rubbish packager, and you never will be. And I also find it very interesting that Fedora does sort of quid pro quo reviews. In Debian, the reviews that are done before a package goes into the distribution, they aren't technical, they're just for licensing, and it's the FTP masters who do it, well, the FTP team. So a small number of people get to review all the licenses. It's a nightmare for them. Whereas in Fedora, there's a technical review as well as the licensing stuff, and lots more people do it. And it means that you get more cross-pollination between people. People can discover techniques more readily. And of course, it shares the workload. One thing I did notice is the difference in attitude towards teams. In Debian, we call them teams. In Fedora, I think it's more SIGs and working groups. So, a bunch of people who are interested on the same kind of packages and get together to do stuff. We both, Debian and Fedora, have the same problem of wiki pages for old teams that have tumbleweeds. But I thought it was interesting that there's a very different focus. In Debian, we use teams a lot to welcome new contributors. So if you're interested in packaging Java, we'll tell you to go and join the Java packaging team, and that's where you'll learn the packaging practices. You'll also find sponsors, and the feedback you'll get will be very relevant because these are people who encounter the same problems that you'll be encountering. In Fedora, at least on the wiki pages that explain how to join the project, there's not a single mention of SIGs or teams or whatever. I find that interesting. I don't know if it means much, but then onto the actual packaging itself. The big difference I saw is what constitutes your reference, source packages. In Debian, the reference is, as far as possible, the upstream tarball, or a tarball that's built from a Git tag or whatever. And on top of that, the Debian packaging. In Fedora, the reference isn't what upstream provides, at least the way I understand it. It's the source RPM that's produced at the end of the build. And there are good things about that and bad things. But I won't go into the details but I thought it was an interesting difference. And then there's more technical stuff about the distribution layout. So the stuff that I've been having trouble with is /lib versus /lib64. In Debian, we use multi-arch. And to be honest, I think multi-arch is a much better approach, but it only really makes, well, I think it makes sense in all cases, but it's only really evident that it makes a lot of sense when you have as many architectures as we do in Debian. Then there's the libexec thing, which I guess makes sense as well, but causes some issues with packaging that we never encounter in Debian because we don't have libexec. And then helpers. So these are all the tools that go around the packaging. Basically, RPM macros in Fedora, and in Debian it's debhelper and the galaxy of stuff that goes along there. And over the last few years in Debian, there's been an awful lot of effort put into these tools to just make packaging as simple as possible. So handle all the complexity in the helpers, which means you can get it right once, fix everything, and if there's a bug, you can fix it for all the packages that use them in a single place. I don't think the RPM macros are quite there yet. I've been working on a CMake package, and I should really be filing, sending patches to for the CMake RPM macros, I guess. But I think it's interesting to invest time in the tools because you reap the benefits over all the packages, and that's something that historically people have said RPMs are nice to package because there's just a one spec file, you write everything in there, and that's it, it's done. Whereas in Debian, there's all these different files, and there's a rules file, which is really complicated. And now the rules file, in lots of cases, is just 2 lines to delegate to DH. Another big difference I saw is in the way you handle, well, the two projects handle licensing information. And I thought this was very interesting because Fedora has the patent issue, the stuff that means that we have RPM fusion because our MP3s and so on can't go in. And the reasoning that... Sorry?
MP3 playback is okay.
MP3 playback is okay, right. But encoding, I guess, still isn't, like lame and so on. And the reason that I've read, at least for this, I don't know if it's true or not, is that because Fedora is backed by Red Hat, there are deep pockets that people could go after in lawsuits. And so the patent stuff is important. And I guess this means that it's a sad reflection, really, on the state of licensing in the open source world, that licensing issues aren't as scary. And so in Debian, we've got the opposite problem. We focus an awful lot of effort on licensing, and this here is the top of the WineGecko Debian copyright file, which I maintain. And the reason Debian doesn't have up-to-date versions of WineGecko is that it takes me months to go through new versions of the package and do all the licensing review to write this thing. This file is 4,000 lines long, and it's machine readable but not machine writable. And you can imagine, it takes me months to write, and then it takes the FTP team months to review it. It's really, really bad. And this is Firefox. If you don't know the connection between WineGecko and Firefox, this is actually Firefox. Firefox is too big to fail. It's one of these packages that's too big to fail, and so it goes into distributions without much scrutiny on the licensing. But there are some actual licensing gotchas in there, stuff that's got the Apple license or MSPL or whatever. And WineGecko isn't too big to fail, and so I have to handle this. WineGecko in Fedora says this. So we trust upstream to do their work. What do upstream say? Not much, and they get it wrong. So I'm not saying Fedora should put the same, go to the same lengths as Debian does. I think Debian goes too far, at least the FTP. The working practices around the Debian copyright file have gone too far, but there's probably something to look at there. And then trends of what does it tell me? What does my experience tell me about distro trends, and what are the impressions I get from Fedora? I think all distros in the Linux world suffer from the same kind of problems nowadays. Old timers are moving on. Like I said earlier, distributions aren't exciting anymore, so it's harder to renew the community. I get the impression, at least in Debian, we no longer have any really sort of big figures that are doing an awful lot of work. There are some people who do lots of work quietly, some people who make lots of noise but don't do much work. But at the same time, open has won, open source has won, free software has won, and so we have more and more upstreams, alternative package management systems, like NPM, Ruby gems, and so on, that mean that it's not unusual now for somebody to come along and say, hey, it would be great if we could package this. Oh, and by the way, to get this in, you also need to package 250 new dependencies. I had to look at Keybase a while back when it was still a Node.js thing, and they had around 200 dependencies that needed packaged. So Keybase isn't in Debian yet. Alternative distribution models as well. This is all the stuff around containers and Flatpaks and so on. That they don't make distributions irrelevant, but they do mean that more people are doing the kind of work that distributions do. Perhaps there's an opportunity there. And quality. Quality, all right, all distributions have put in a lot of effort in getting packaging better, but there's not that many people who look at what actually goes inside the packages, until a security bug comes along. And in Debian, there's been an awful lot of discussion on the mailing lists about packaging Node stuff, and there's a guy called Pirate Praveen who started packaging GitLab, and you might think of GitLab as a Ruby thing, and yes, it is a Ruby thing, but it also uses an awful lot of Node. And so he's been packaging lots and lots and lots of Node packages. He's got over 400 packages, Node and Ruby, already. And sometimes somebody goes and has a look, when he files an intent to package bug, somebody goes and looks at what's in the package and says, this is silly, there's no point packaging this, what we should be doing is patching the reverse dependencies so that we don't need this. And you end up with Node packages that look like that, so you can't read the details there, but it's one package that only exists to check if another package is installed. Right? What's the point of having dependency management in your distributions if you end up packaging stuff like this? What are we good at? So, going back to the main Fedora website, freedom. Debian, I think, and Fedora, we're both good at ensuring that our users have the 4 freedoms. So, right, licensing, what are we good at? And this is stuff that I think we should think about, pushing up. Fedora says stick close to upstream, but there's stuff that all distributions do, and perhaps we'd be better off if we were telling upstreams how to do them. Check your licensing, how to build software, how to build distributions, which is taking all these moving things stable out of them. And you need to do that for distros. You also need to do that for Flatpaks and containers and so on. And lots of people are going to be learning the same lessons that we've been learning over the last 20 years. Handling fixes, getting security fixes to your users without breaking their production, and fixing important bugs as well without breaking their production. We know how to do that in distributions. Lots of people are going to be learning how to do that again and again and again. User-oriented quality, this is getting the configuration right, getting something that's usable quickly, but that can be adjusted to the user's requirements easily. We do that an awful lot in distributions. And other stuff, more technical stuff, like understanding what it means to be stable. So ABI stability. This is something, lots of people in the Debian world, they see unstable versus testing versus stable, and they don't understand what stable means, and they think that unstable means that it's very buggy and it's going to crash a lot. It's not about that, it's about ABI stability. And there's stuff going on in Fedora that's very interesting on this front, stuff that Dodgy Sekateli is doing with Abigail and stuff like that. There are tasks on Taskotron that will tell you if your RPMs are breaking ABI contracts, and I think that's very, very interesting. But it's stuff that doesn't mean much if we don't educate upstreams about it, because we can't cope with changing ABIs if the upstreams don't change their SO names and so on, or their node versions, etc. What are we not so good at? Well, getting upstream involved. I don't know if it's something that we're not good at, or if it's just that we get lost in the day-to-day grind of getting distributions out, and so that gets put on the back burner. And maintaining quality. This is something that we all struggle with. Packages that are old and unmaintained, but that where there's just enough maintainer activity to keep things ticking along, and it just gets old and crufty. And but so in all that, there's lots that's not specific to any given distro. So there are lessons that we learn that are valid across distributions. There's also lots that's not specific to the fact of being in a distribution at all. It's equally valid just for general software engineering practices. So, in conclusion, let's define the future, but define it together. And continuing on from the keynote this morning about collaboration between RHEL and CentOS and Fedora, I think there are lots of opportunities for collaboration beyond that. And that's it from me. If you have any questions, the floor is open. Yeah?
I personally consider Debian and Fedora one of two major Linux distributions, not only, let's say, counting RHEL and such those two distributions. So, do you see some space for collaboration between Debian and Fedora on some level?
Yeah, so the question is, do I see space for collaboration between Debian and Fedora? Yes, definitely. And I was quite interested to see that Hans de Goede, sorry if I'm mispronouncing the name, is giving a talk just afterwards, because he's one of the Fedora people that I saw collaborate with Debian a while ago in the games teams. So I'm a member of the games team in Debian, and there's a games SIG in Fedora, and at one point there was some collaboration between the two, and I think there's space for more of that. I think there's also room for not necessarily collaborating directly on the distributions themselves, but coming up with ways of explaining to upstreams how to do things better. And I think that would have more weight if it wasn't just Debian telling people that they're doing, well, not necessarily doing things wrong, but that they could do things better. But if all distros somehow came up with yet another standard. There's another question.
I just had a comment on that. I'm Adam Williamson, by the way.
Right.
I think there's a lot of not very visible collaboration that goes on already. Like I do work with Debian packages and certain packages that I maintain, and we do work together and talk about stream. And licensing is an interesting area there, because I agree with you that Debian is much more systematic about licensing. But in Fedora, there's a kind of haphazard thing where there are some people who are interested in licensing and take it seriously, and we do often find ourselves working with maintainers from other distributions, because like you say, that's more weight when 5 packages get together and say, no, you can't just be slapdash with your licensing. You've got to take care of this. So I think it goes on, but it's not very visible necessarily.
Yeah.
If you're out in a big cross-distribution working group, it's still on an individual maintainer.
Yeah, so I'll repeat the comment, summarize the comment for the recording. So basically Adam was saying that there is collaboration that goes on in the background between individual packagers, individual maintainers, and there's also an awful lot of collaboration that goes on just because Fedora packagers are also upstreams, and likewise Debian developers are also upstreams on the same projects, and so there are people involved in GCC or glibc and so on. And there's collaboration that goes on. And he was also saying that licensing stuff does have more weight if comments on the license come from multiple different distributions. Yes.
Unfortunately, what I've seen is that it's usually just Fedora and Debian who complain about licensing things, about bundled libraries and everything. And so instead of dismissing one distribution, they just dismiss 2 distributions. They say everyone else just packages it without complaining, you are the problem.
Yeah. So the comment was that in practice it's just Debian and Fedora that complain about stuff like licensing, and other distros, I guess, care less about it. Like, for AURs, for instance, in Arch Linux. And so people just, instead of dismissing one distribution, they dismiss 2. Yeah.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask, so I work on upstream software and also I think it's in Fedora because I work on Fedora, but I'd also like to see it in Debian. I don't feel like you're really kind of covering the spectrum of users unless you get into Debian. And I'm wondering, is it, in Debian, like what's the ratio of packages available for packaging versus people who want a package? I mean, do I just do something good and then wait until a Debian developer comes along and sees that it's attractive and does it, or should I like become a Debian developer? Or what would you say?
Yeah, so the question is about getting upstream software into Debian, and if there's a way of measuring the ratio of stuff that's waiting to be packaged in Debian versus the available workforce, I guess. and whether you need to become a Debian developer if you want to get your upstream software into Debian. So I'd say, to answer the last question, becoming a Debian developer is probably always a good idea if you're interested in that. There is one way of measuring the ratio of interest to available workforce, which is the WNPP page, which lists all the packages that people have pledged to package, and more importantly, all the packages that people have asked for. And it's huge. The HTML for that page is over 1 megabyte in size. It takes ages to load in a browser. So yeah, there's an awful lot of stuff that people want in Debian, and there aren't enough maintainers. So, and yeah, but it brings me to another thought I had when I was preparing this. Going back to where I came from in my packaging history, what's important is actually getting software into the hands of end users. Packaging isn't an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And so I hold lots of hope for stuff like Flatpak and so on that will be another way of getting software into the hands of end users, and perhaps more driven by upstreams, because upstreams will be able to, well, hopefully write Flatpaks that will work across distributions. But yeah, there's no miracle answer really. You can ask for a package, try to get users who are also Debian developers interested in your software. Usually once a Debian developer starts using your software a lot, it appears in Debian. But if you just file an RFP, a request for a package, it's liable to just sit there. Yeah.
Yeah, there's also some middle ground. So we have a facility called Mentors Debian Award, where everyone can upload, and this is a place where a Debian developer or other interested people can review packages. So usually, if you just do, let's say, initial crappy job, because you don't really know Debian packaging, but if you do a crappy job of doing it and showing it to the Debian developer, then they usually trigger some OCD means, and they will give you stuff and give you all sorts of comments. Please fix this, or this could be easier, and this way it's maybe much easier to trigger some interest.
Yeah. Yeah, so for the recording, that was, there's another way of getting a package into Debian, which is to start the packaging work yourself and upload it to mentors.debian.net or .org, I can't remember which it is now. And that's a way of getting your package up for review, and then you send an RFS, and you're more likely to get interest that way because you've actually put in some work, and people will go and look at your package and tell you how to improve it. And once you've got people hooked like that, it's a bit like when you start in an auction, they're liable to go all the way and get your package into Debian. And that's also a first step for you to becoming a packager and maintainer and so on. Yeah.
What can upstream do to change the package in Debian? Because if the package in Debian is packaged in a way that upstream thinks it's not the best way, how can we change it?
Yeah, so the question is...
There is our own version of the package.
Yeah, right, yeah. So the question is how can upstreams get changes in Debian packages? That's a really, really tough question. So the last point you made about getting newer versions, that's easy enough. In theory, you file a bug asking for a new version. If the maintainer is not responsive, it's not likely to move all that much. But if you disagree with the way the Debian package is done, that's a very, very tough situation, because there isn't really any conflict resolution process in Debian that works. Not something, well, not something that you can invoke as someone external to the Debian community. There's a TSC, but the technical committee. Yeah, thanks. Technical committee, but that's more for conflict between Debian developers. They might step in for upstream versus Debian. I don't know. Probably not. It's not something you want to try, I'd say. You really need to find some Debian maintainer who's interested in your package and is willing to be your advocate in the project. And that's, last question. Yeah.
I noticed that Debian community consider Ubuntu as a sort of downstream.
Yeah.
Can you clarify what is the real relationship with how Debian community perceive Ubuntu community?
There are as many. So the question is, does Debian perceive Ubuntu as a derivative? So yes. And what is the relationship between Ubuntu and Debian? basically. And the answer to that is there are as many answers to that as Debian developers, I think, and probably more. So it's a point of contention. Some people in Debian consider that Ubuntu sort of leeches off Debian. Others consider it as a good thing. I think it's probably overall a good thing. You know, the more users there are of Debian stuff, the better things are. It's a complicated relationship. If you look at some of the core stuff that happens in Debian, it is driven by Ubuntu people like Doko, who's the GCC maintainer. He's a Canonical employee. So it's complicated. I think things have changed recently, well, over the last few years as well, with the change of focus in Canonical. So it's perhaps less of an issue now than it was at one point. But they appear in the dashboard, but there are other derivatives that are important as well, like mint and so on. So yeah, that doesn't really answer the question, but I don't really have an answer, sorry. And well, thank you very much for your time. Great talk.